Good morning, students. Today we will be discussing about neuromuscular junction. So neuromuscular junction, as we know that by the name, it is a junction between a nerve and a muscle fiber. So now first we will be going to see what is the structure and physiological function of a skeletal muscle neuromuscular junction. Understood? So we will be discussing this topic under the heading of definition, anatomy, mechanism of transmission of impulse, and what are the neuromuscular junction abnormalities, clinical aspects. So this is the diagram showing how a nerve is ending in a skeletal muscle. So a motor nerve coming through the spinal nerve that will be coming and ending in a skeletal muscle. So that's the diagram, it is shown here. So neuromuscular junction, otherwise called a myoneural junction, is the junction between a motor nerve and a skeletal muscle fiber. Understood? So in the anatomy, when you take a neuromuscular junction, you can see a nerve, a muscle fiber, the membrane of the muscle, and it is not in continuity. So there is a gap between a nerve and the muscle fiber. So a neuromuscular junction structure, you can see what all things? A presynaptic portion, that is the nerve terminal, a synaptic cleft, that is the gap between the nerve and the muscle, and the postsynaptic portion, that is the muscle membrane. So you can see the structure in this diagram. This is the structure of a typical neuromuscular junction. The axon that is coming and ending near the muscle, and that portion is dilated. It is called the axon terminal or presynaptic portion of the neuromuscular junction. Inside that, in the nerve, you can see there is lot of mitochondria, vesicles containing neurotransmitter, and here the neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. And the active zone, it is the portion where this vesicle fuse and release the neurotransmitter, as well as in the presynaptic membrane there is a calcium channel, voltage gated calcium channel, and the gap between the nerve and the muscle membrane is called a synaptic cleft. And the postsynaptic membrane is the membrane of the muscle, which is forming infoldings to increase the surface area, and this membrane contains receptor. That is, that receptors are called the ligand gated receptor. Here the ligand is acetylcholine. So when acetylcholine comes, it will bind with its receptor and they will act as ion channel. So the receptor present in the postsynaptic membrane is called a ligand gated ion channels. So in the terminal button of the nerve is expanded, and that is called synaptic knob. Synaptic knob, you can see mitochondria, neurotransmitter inside the vesicle, and active zone and voltage gated calcium channel. Acetylcholine is synthesized in the nerve terminal. It is synthesized in the mitochondria of the nerve terminal, and acetylcholine is formed from choline combines with the acetyl coenzyme A in the presence of ATP and glucose by the enzyme transferase. It will form acetylcholine, and this acetylcholine will be degraded by or broken into acetate and choline by acetylchoesterase enzyme, and this choline will be retaken into the presynaptic terminal. So synaptic cleft, it is a space between the nerve and the muscle membrane around 20 to 30 nanometer width, and it consists, and inside the synaptic cleft is filled with the extracellular fluid. The composition will be same as that of ECF. Sodium, potassium, calcium, acetylcholine esterase enzyme, etc. will be present in the synaptic cleft. So the acetylcholine enzyme and esterase enzyme present in the synaptic cleft will break down acetylcholine into acetate and choline. Postsynaptic membrane, that is the muscle membrane, It's called the end plate membrane or motor end plate. Last diagram we have seen that it is having junctional fault, and this membrane contains ligand gated ion channel, that is acetylcholine receptor. Understood. So this infoldings of this postsynaptic membrane will increase the surface area. So this is the diagram showing different events of neuromuscular transmission. That is, first step is, now we have discussed about the anatomy. Now we are going to see how neuromuscular transmission is taking place. And in this junction, what is transmitted? Action potential from the nerve is transmitted into action potential in the muscle. So now we are going to see how it is taking place. That is, action potential will come through the nerve, and that is the first step. And in the second step, what happens is this action potential causes opening of voltage gated calcium channel. So what happens? Calcium will enter into the nerve terminal. The increased calcium concentration causes movement of the vesicle and fusion of the vesicle in the active zone. That is the third step. And the acetylcholine will be released into the synaptic cleft. Fourth step, the acetylcholine will diffuse and it will come and bind with its receptor present in the postsynaptic membrane. Now what happens? The acetylcholine, when it binds with the receptor, it will act as an ion channel and it causes the movement of positive ions into the muscle membrane. When positive ions enter into the muscle cell, it causes a change in the membrane potential. That is called the end plate potential. When this end plate potential reaches the firing level, what happens is the action potential will be produced in the muscle membrane and that will be transmitted to the entire muscle fiber. So this is how the neuromuscular transmission is taking place. We will see it again. The first step is release of acetylcholine by the nerve terminal. Action potential reaches the nerve. It causes the opening of voltage gated calcium channel in the presynaptic membrane. Calcium will enter into the nerve. This increased concentration of calcium causes fusion of the vesicle and release of acetylcholine. So for a single action potential, around 60 vesicles will fuse and each vesicle contains 10,000 molecules of acetylcholine. So large quantum of acetylcholine will be released for a single action potential. This acetylcholine bind with its receptor and the receptor will open, allow the entry of sodium, potassium, calcium, that is cations will enter through this receptor. Because of this negative charge, it will not allow negatively charged ions. So the entry of these positive ions will cause the development of end plate potential. They are local potential changes produced inside the muscle fiber is called the end plate potential. This depolarizes the adjacent muscle membrane to its firing level and action potential will be produced. So we will again see this in a flow chart how neuromuscular transmission is taking place. What all things we have discussed, we will now summarize into a flow chart. Action potential will reach the axon terminal. It causes the opening of calcium channel. Calcium will enter into the nerve. Synaptic vesicle will fuse at the active site. Acetylcholine will be released into the synaptic cleft. And the binding of acetylcholine to its receptor causes the production of end plate potential. When this end plate potential brings the membrane potential of the muscle to the firing level, action potential will be produced and that action potential will be spread to the entire muscle membrane. And once this action potential, after its action, what happens? It will be destroyed by the acetylcholine esterase enzyme and diffuses out of the space and taken back to the presynaptic membrane. So now we have discussed about the neuromuscular junction in the skeletal muscle. Same like that, neuromuscular transmission is taking place in the smooth muscle and cardiac muscle, but not this much specialized structures we can see. Neurotransmitters present in the dilated areas of the axon and that is called the varicosities. And on stimulation, what happens? Neurotransmitters will be released and that initiate action potential in the muscle fiber. So this is the varicosities. You can see during the course of the nerve, there is dilations in the nerve and that is called the varicosities. Inside the varicosities, neurotransmitters are stored. So the innervation of smooth muscle is of autonomic type, that is sympathetic or parasympathetic. Here we cannot see a typically well arranged neuromuscular junction. The nerve fiber will be running along the muscle membrane, and the neurotransmitter may be acetylcholine or noradrenaline. It will be stored in clear vesicle, dense core vesicles, and beaded enlargements you can see, that is varicosities. Understood? So this is the diagram showing the neuromuscular junction in the smooth muscle. Now the diseases associated with the neuromuscular junction and neuromuscular transmission, one of an important disease, most commonly affected disease you can see is myasthenia gravis. It is a autoimmune disease. Understood? That is characterized by weakness and fatigability of the skeletal muscle. The incidence is more in females, and the main features is weakness and fatigability. That weakness will occur after repeated use of that muscle, and it will improve with rest or sleep. And the distribution of weakness, the main muscles affected is cranial muscles, muscles of eyelids and extraocular muscles. Later the limb muscles will be affected, and respiratory muscles will be affected. And the pathophysiology of this disease is it is an autoimmune disease. That is, our own body will produce antibody against acetylcholine receptor. So that acetylcholine receptor number and availability will be reduced. As the neurotransmitter doesn't have the receptor to bind. So this is the neuromuscular junction in normal person A, and in B you can see in myasthenia gravis affected person the changes in the neuromuscular junction. So the treatment is we will give anticholinesterase medication, immunosuppressive agent to reduce our immune activity, thymectomy and plasmapheresis. So these are the treatment of choice for myasthenia gravis. And this is about the topic. I think you have understood what is neuromuscular junction anatomy and how neuromuscular transmission is taking place and the disease affecting the neuromuscular junction. Thank you all for listening to the class. Thank you.